At 3:47 a.m., Lena Carter sat alone in a safe house, staring at the door that would never open. The man who promised to abandon his empire for her, Dominic Russo, the city's most feared mafia boss, was supposed to arrive hours ago so they could disappear forever. Instead, the morning news showed him marrying Victoria Laurent, daughter of a rival crime dynasty, in the most lavish wedding the underworld had ever seen. Lena watched it all on television, realizing she had spent the night waiting for a man who had chosen someone else. Her heart didn't break. It shattered into silence. If you're hooked by this story of betrayal and broken promises, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The television screen flickered in the pre-dawn darkness, casting ghostly shadows across Lena's face. She hadn't moved in over an hour. Couldn't move. The remote control had slipped from her fingers sometime around 4 a.m., clattering onto the cheap linoleum floor of the safe house, but she barely registered the sound. Her entire world had narrowed to the images playing out before her, images that were systematically destroying everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and the man she had believed would change everything. The wedding footage played on loop across every news channel. Of course it did. When Dominic Russo married, the entire city paid attention. Lena watched as cameras captured him standing at the altar in a black tuxedo that probably cost more than she made in a year, his dark hair perfectly styled, his jaw set in that familiar hard line she had kissed so many times in the shadows. Beside him stood Victoria Laurent, breathtaking in a custom gown that sparkled under the cathedral lights, her smile radiant and triumphant as she claimed the city's most dangerous prize. The ceremony had taken place at St. Augustine's Cathedral, the same cathedral where Lena's parents had been married 30 years ago, back when her life was simple and dreams didn't come with body counts. In a stunning display of unity between two of the city's most powerful families, the reporter's voice chirped with barely contained excitement, Dominic Russo and Victoria Laurent were joined in matrimony last night in what insiders are calling the wedding of the decade. The union between the Russo and Laurent families is expected to reshape the city's entire power structure. Lena closed her eyes, but the images remained burned into her retinas. She had memorized every detail in the hours she'd been sitting here. The way Dominic's hand had rested on Victoria's lower back as they descended the cathedral steps. The champagne toast where he'd smiled, actually smiled, at something Victoria whispered in his ear. The first dance, elegant and practiced, as if they'd been partners their whole lives instead of political pawns in a game Lena had foolishly believed Dominic would refuse to play. 2 weeks ago, he had promised her everything. "Give me 2 weeks," he'd said, his forehead pressed against hers in the darkness of her apartment, his hands framing her face like she was something precious, instead of a secret he kept hidden from his world. 2 weeks to handle my father, to make the arrangements, to ensure we can disappear without leaving bodies behind. Then we walk away from all of this, the families, the violence, the empire. We start over somewhere they'll never find us. Just you and me, Lena. I swear it. She had believed him. The evidence of her stupidity sat packed in 2 suitcases by the door, everything she owned that mattered, condensed into luggage she could carry. She'd quit her job at Mercy General 3 days ago, telling her supervisor she was moving across the country to care for a sick relative. She'd broken her lease, donated most of her furniture, said goodbye to the few friends she'd made since moving to the city 5 years ago. She'd erased her entire life, prepared to become someone new, all because Dominic Russo had looked into her eyes and promised her forever. The safe house had been his idea. Neutral territory, he'd explained when he'd given her the address and the key 2 days ago. Somewhere my father's people won't be watching. Pack light, stay invisible, and wait for me. I'll be there by midnight on the 23rd. We'll be gone before sunrise. It was now 4:32 a.m. on the 24th. Dominic had married another woman 6 hours ago. And Lena sat alone in a dusty room that smelled of mildew and broken promises, watching her entire future crumble into ash. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, the 3rd time in the last hour. She didn't need to look to know it wasn't Dominic. The first 2 calls had been from Maya, her former roommate, and the closest thing to family she had in this city. Maya didn't know about Dominic. Nobody did. Their entire relationship had existed in shadows, stolen moments between the demands of his empire and the reality of her ordinary life. The phone went silent, then immediately buzzed again. This time Lena looked. Not a call. A notification. A bank transfer. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the screen, part of her already knowing what she would find, another part desperately hoping she was wrong. Transfer received $500,000. From D. Russo. Message, I'm sorry, take this and disappear. Don't try to contact me, it's safer this way. D. The phone slipped from her fingers. $500,000. The exact price Dominic Russo had placed on 6 months of whispered promises and stolen kisses. The price of her silence, her absence, her complete erasure from his life. Lena stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor with a sound like a scream. Her chest felt too tight, her lungs unable to draw enough air. The walls of the safe house pressed inward, suffocating her with their peeling paint and water-stained ceilings. She stumbled toward the window, yanked aside the dusty curtain, and stared out at the city beginning to wake under a slate-gray sky. Somewhere out there, Dominic Russo was probably in a honeymoon suite with his new wife, celebrating the merger that would make both families untouchable. And she was here, paid off, and dismissed like a problem solved. The rage came suddenly, burning through the numbness that had held her paralyzed for hours. It started in her chest and spread outward, hot and violent and absolutely consuming. Her hand found the remote control on the floor, and before conscious thought could intervene, she hurled it at the television screen. Glass shattered. Sparks flew. The images of Dominic and Victoria froze mid-dance, then died in a shower of electronic snow. The silence that followed was deafening. Lena sank to the floor, her back against the wall, and finally, let herself cry. Not delicate tears, but great gasping sobs that tore from her throat and shook her entire body. She cried for the future she'd imagined, for the man she'd believed existed beneath the monster everyone else feared, for the naive woman she'd been who had actually thought love could conquer the kind of darkness that lived in Dominic Russo's world. She cried until there was nothing left inside her but a hollow ache and the bitter taste of betrayal. When the tears finally stopped, dawn had broken fully over the city. Lena pulled herself to her feet, her legs unsteady, her eyes swollen and burning. She caught her reflection in the mirror hanging crookedly on the opposite wall, a pale ghost of herself, dark circles under red-rimmed eyes, her chestnut hair a tangled mess around her shoulders. She looked like someone who had died and hadn't realized it yet. The thought should have broken her further. Instead, it sparked something cold and hard in her chest, something that felt almost like clarity. Dominic Russo had made his choice. He had chosen power over love, duty over freedom, a strategic alliance over the woman he claimed had changed his life. And he had done it without even having the courage to tell her to her face. Lena's gaze fell on her phone, still lying on the floor where she'd dropped it, the screen cracked but still glowing with that obscene transfer notification, $500,000. Blood money, she thought bitterly. Payment for services rendered. The going rate for a mistress who knew too much and needed to vanish. But as she stared at the number, an idea began to form, cold and calculated and completely unlike anything Lena Carter, pediatric nurse and eternal optimist, had ever considered before. Dominic thought he could pay her to disappear quietly. He thought he could erase their entire relationship with a bank transfer and a dismissive text message. He thought she would simply fade away, heartbroken and compliant, while he built his empire with Victoria Laurent at his side. He was wrong. Lena picked up her phone, her fingers surprisingly steady as she opened her messages. She typed quickly before she could second-guess herself, before the part of her that still loved him could interfere. I'll take your money, but I won't disappear quietly. You want me gone? You're going to have to face me first. She hit send before she could lose her nerve. The response came almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting, phone in hand. Lena, don't. It's not safe. Just take the money and go, please. Her laugh was harsh and humorless. Please. As if he had the right to ask her for anything after what he'd done. The Laurent reception is tonight at the Elysium Hotel. I'll be there. If you want me gone from your life, you can tell me to my face why you chose her. She didn't wait for his response. She silenced her phone, slipped it into her pocket, and turned toward her packed suitcases. She had 12 hours to prepare. 12 hours to transform from the heartbroken woman crying on the floor of a safe house into someone capable of walking into the lion's den and demanding answers from the man who had destroyed her. 12 hours to decide if she was brave enough to do something utterly insane. She was. 6 months earlier, Lena's life had been pleasantly, almost aggressively normal. She worked the night shift at Mercy General Hospital, specializing in pediatric emergency care. She had a tiny apartment in a neighborhood that was almost trendy, a roommate who baked experimental desserts and left passive-aggressive notes about dish duty, and a dating life that could charitably be described as non-existent. She was content, maybe not happy in the soul-deep way people wrote poems about, but satisfied. Fulfilled by her work, if not by the rest of her existence. That all changed on a Tuesday night in March, when the ambulance bay doors crashed open and two men carried in a third who was bleeding out from a gunshot wound to the chest. "GSW to the upper left quadrant," one of the EMTs shouted as they rushed the gurney through the doors. "Vitals are crashing. He's lost a lot of blood." Lena was already moving, her training overriding everything else. She fell into step beside the gurney, her practiced eyes assessing the patient even as they rushed him toward Trauma 1. Male, approximately 30 years old, well-dressed despite the blood soaking his white shirt. Dark hair, strong features, unconscious but fighting. She could see his hands clenching and unclenching even in his semi-conscious state, as if his body refused to give up even when his mind had checked out. "Pressure's dropping," one of the nurses called out. "We're losing him." "Not on my watch," Lena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had pulled countless people back from death's door. "Get me O-negative blood now." And somebody paged Dr. Reeves. No doctors. The voice came from one of the men who had carried the patient in, tall, built like a boxer, with cold eyes that had probably seen more death than anyone in this hospital. He stepped between Lena and the trauma room door, his hand resting meaningfully on his jacket where she could clearly see the outline of a weapon. "Excuse me?" Lena's eyes narrowed. "Your friend is dying. He needs a surgeon. He needs you to save his life without asking questions and without involving anyone else." The man pulled out a thick envelope and held it out. "There's $50,000 here. You stabilize him, remove the bullet, stitch him up, and forget you ever saw his face. Can you do that?" Every instinct Lena had screamed at her to refuse, to call security, to follow protocol and report this obvious criminal situation to the authorities. But then the patient on the gurney made a sound, a low, pained groan that spoke of agony beyond bearing, and her eyes met his as they flickered open for just a moment. Dark eyes, impossibly dark like the ocean at midnight, and in them she saw something that made her breath catch. Not menace, not cruelty, desperation. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Please." Lena looked from him to the man with the envelope to the nurses who had stopped in the doorway, waiting for her decision. She knew this was wrong, knew she should refuse, should call for help, should follow every rule and regulation that governed her profession, but something in those dark eyes held her captive. "Everyone out," she heard herself say. "I'll handle this." The nurses exchanged glances but didn't argue. They'd worked with Lena long enough to know that when she used that tone, there was no point in debate. The man with the envelope smiled slightly and placed the money on the counter. "You're smart. That's good. We'll be right outside. You have 2 hours." Then they were gone, and Lena was alone with a dying stranger who looked at her like she was his last hope in a world that had clearly tried to kill him. "Okay," she said quietly, moving to his side and examining the wound with practiced efficiency. "You're going to tell me your name, you're going to stay conscious, and you're going to live through this. Understood?" He managed something that might have been a smile. "Dominic," he said. "My name is Dominic." "Well, Dominic," Lena said, already reaching for the instruments she would need, "you've made some very bad life choices. But tonight isn't the night you pay for them. Tonight, you live." She worked with the kind of focused intensity that made the rest of the world fade away. The bullet had missed his heart by less than an inch. He should have been dead before he reached the hospital. But somehow, impossibly, he'd held on. Stubborn, she thought. This man was too stubborn to die. She removed the bullet, a clean extraction, thankfully, with minimal additional damage. She repaired the torn tissue, closed the wound in careful layers, administered antibiotics and pain medication. And through it all, Dominic stayed conscious, his dark eyes following her movements with an intensity that should have been unsettling but somehow wasn't. "You're good at this," he said at one point, his voice stronger despite the trauma his body had endured. "I'd better be," Lena replied, not looking up from her sutures. "You're paying me a year's salary for 2 hours of work." "Worth every penny." He paused, then added, "What's your name?" She should have refused to answer, should have maintained the professional distance that would make it easier to forget this night had ever happened. But those eyes were on her again, and she found herself answering despite her better judgment. "Lena. Lena," he repeated like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. "You just saved my life, Lena. I'm a nurse. It's literally my job description. Not like this." His hand moved faster than she would have thought possible given his injury, and caught her wrist. His grip was gentle but firm, his skin warm against hers. Most people would have called the police, turned me in, let me die rather than risk being involved with someone like me. "Someone like you?" Lena met his gaze squarely. "I don't know anything about you, Dominic, except that you're stubborn enough to stay alive when you should have bled out 20 minutes ago." His thumb traced a small circle on the inside of her wrist, and she felt her pulse jump in response. A reaction that had nothing to do with professionalism and everything to do with the dangerous electricity she could feel crackling between them. "You're better off not knowing," he said quietly. "Trust me." She should have agreed. Should have finished her work, taken the money, and walked away from Dominic and whatever darkness surrounded him. Instead, she heard herself say, "What if I want to know?" Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of something he saw in her that she hadn't known existed. "Then you're braver than you are smart," he said, "or maybe crazier than both." Lena pulled her wrist free and returned to her sutures. "I've been called worse." When she finally finished, nearly 2 hours had passed. Dominic's color had improved, his breathing steady, his vitals stable. He would need rest, antibiotics, and careful monitoring, but he would live. She helped him sit up, her hands steady on his shoulders as he winced through the movement. "You need to take it easy for at least a week," she instructed, slipping into the familiar comfort of medical directives. "No strenuous activity, change the dressing twice daily, watch for signs of infection. Lena." She stopped talking. His hand found hers again, and this time she didn't pull away. "Thank you," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made something in her chest tighten. "You didn't have to help me. You took a risk tonight that most people wouldn't take." "Yeah, well," she said, trying to maintain some semblance of professional distance even as her fingers curled around his. "I'm apparently crazier than I am smart." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from dangerous to devastating, and Lena felt her world tilt on its axis. She should have walked away. She didn't. "Can I see you again?" Dominic asked. "When I'm not bleeding out?" "That depends," Lena said. "Are you going to tell me what happened tonight? Who shot you and why?" His smile faded. "That's not a conversation you want to have, Lena. Trust me." "Stop telling me what I want." She squeezed his hand once, then let go. "I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting from the truth." "No," he agreed, his eyes searching her face like he was trying to memorize every detail. "You're definitely not fragile. But the truth about my world," he shook his head, "it's darker than you can imagine. Try me." He studied her for a long moment, and Lena had the strange sense that she was being evaluated, weighed against some internal standard she couldn't see. Finally, he reached into his pocket, moving carefully because of his injury, and pulled out a business card. Plain white, expensive cardstock, with nothing but a phone number embossed in black ink. "Call me," he said. "Tomorrow or next week, or whenever you decide whether you really want to know who I am. But understand this, Lena. Once you make that call, there's no going back to your normal life. Everything changes." She took the card, her fingers brushing his. "Maybe I'm ready for things to change." "Be sure," Dominic said, his voice low and serious. "Because I'm the kind of man your mother warned you about. The kind who brings danger instead of flowers, complications instead of stability. If you call me, you need to understand what you're getting into." Lena slipped the card into her pocket and met his eyes without flinching. "I saved your life tonight, Dominic. I think I've already proven I can handle danger." His answering smile was equal parts admiration and warning. "We'll see about that." The men who had brought him in returned exactly 2 hours later, as promised. They helped Dominic to his feet, supporting him despite his obvious determination to walk on his own. At the door, he turned back one last time. "Don't forget," he said. "Once you call, everything changes." "I won't forget," Lena promised, and she didn't. 3 days later, after 3 sleepless nights spent staring at that business card and telling herself all the reasons she should throw it away, she made the call. Dominic answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting. Lena. Just her name spoken in that deep voice, and she felt something ignite in her chest. I want to know, she said. I want to know who you are and what your world looks like. Even if it's dark? Especially if it's dark. He was quiet for a moment, and she could hear something that might have been satisfaction in his breathing. There's a restaurant on 5th Street called Salvatore's, he finally said. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Come alone. Wear something that makes you feel powerful. Why? Because you're about to walk into my world, Lena. And I need you to understand from the beginning that you're not a victim. You're choosing this. You're choosing me. She should have been frightened, should have heard the warning in his words and ended the call. Instead, she found herself smiling. Tomorrow night, she confirmed. 8 o'clock. Tomorrow night, he agreed. And Lena? Don't be late. I'm not a patient man. The line went dead, and Lena was left standing in her apartment, heart racing, phone pressed to her ear, wondering what the hell she had just agreed to. She was about to find out. Tomorrow night, everything would change. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was exactly the kind of change she'd been waiting for her entire life. She ignored the other voice, the one that warned her that some changes were irreversible, that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. That voice sounded too much like fear, and Lena Carter had never been the kind of woman who let fear make her decisions. Not then. Not yet. Salvatore's wasn't the kind of restaurant that advertised. You either knew about it or you didn't belong there. Lena discovered this when she tried to look it up online and found nothing. No website, no reviews, not even a mention in the city's dining guides. Just an address on 5th Street and a phone number that went to voicemail. She almost didn't go. Standing in front of her closet the next evening, staring at clothes that suddenly seemed inadequate for whatever she was about to walk into, Lena questioned every decision that had led to this moment. She was a nurse. A good one. She had a simple life, a safe life, and she was about to risk it all for a man she'd spent exactly 2 hours with while he bled on her operating table. Wear something that makes you feel powerful, Dominic had said. Lena reached for the black dress in the back of her closet, the one she'd bought on impulse 2 years ago and never worn because it felt too bold, too sophisticated for her ordinary existence. Silk that draped like water, a neckline that suggested without revealing, a hemline that ended just above her knees. She put it on and barely recognized herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked confident, dangerous even. Someone who could walk into a mysterious restaurant and demand answers from a man who'd warned her about darkness. Someone brave enough to choose the unknown over the safe. Lena arrived at Salvatore's at exactly 8 o'clock. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of an old brownstone, its windows covered with heavy curtains that blocked any view inside. No sign announced its presence. Only the address numbers mounted beside a discreet black door confirmed she'd found the right place. She knocked, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door opened immediately, and a man in an immaculate suit looked her up and down with the kind of assessment that probably detected weapons and weaknesses in equal measure. Name? His voice was flat, professional, revealing nothing. Lena Carter. I'm meeting. We know who you're meeting. He stepped aside, gesturing her into a dimly lit foyer. This way, please. The interior of Salvatore's bore no resemblance to any restaurant Lena had ever entered. The lighting was deliberately low, casting everything in amber shadows. Heavy velvet curtains divided the space into private alcoves where she could hear the murmur of conversation without seeing the speakers. Classical music played softly, almost imperceptibly beneath the other sounds. And everywhere, at every table, standing at strategic points throughout the room, were men who looked like they could kill you before your appetizer arrived. Lena's escort led her through the main dining room toward a private section in the back. She could feel eyes following her progress, could sense the weight of attention from the shadowed alcoves. Whoever these people were, they noticed everything. He's waiting for you, the man said, pulling back a curtain to reveal a small private dining room. Dominic sat at a table set for two, a glass of wine in his hand, looking completely at ease in this world of shadows and silent threats. He'd traded the blood-stained white shirt for a dark suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, his hair styled with casual perfection, his dark eyes tracking her movement as she stepped into the room. He stood as she entered, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed incongruous with everything else about him. Lena. Her name was a greeting and an acknowledgement and something else she couldn't quite identify. You came. You told me not to be late. She moved toward the table, refusing to show the nervousness fluttering in her stomach. I'm very punctual. His smile was brief but genuine. I've noticed. You're exactly on time, which means you probably arrived 5 minutes early and waited outside to make sure you walked in at precisely 8 o'clock. She flushed slightly, irritated that he'd read her so accurately. How's your wound? Healing perfectly, thanks to an excellent nurse. He gestured to the chair across from him. Please sit. We have a lot to talk about. Lena sat, hyper-aware of the intimacy of the space, the heavy curtain that blocked them from view, the single candle flickering between them, the way Dominic watched her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. A server appeared silently, poured her wine, and vanished before she could say thank you. You said you wanted to know who I am, Dominic began without preamble. So let me ask you first, what do you think you know? Lena considered the question, took a sip of wine that tasted expensive and complex. I know you got shot and couldn't go to a regular hospital. I know you travel with armed guards and eat at restaurants that don't officially exist. I know you paid me $50,000 in cash to keep quiet about your injury. She met his eyes directly. So I'm guessing you're either very rich, very dangerous, or both. Both, he confirmed without hesitation. Does that scare you? Should it? Yes. He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. Lena, I meant what I said about my world being dark. I'm not exaggerating or trying to be mysterious. I'm the head of one of the most powerful crime families in this city, the Russo family. We control territory, we settle disputes, we enforce rules that the police can't or won't enforce. Some people call us the Mafia. Others just call us dangerous. His words should have sent her running. Instead, they crystallized something she'd already suspected, made real what she'd only guessed at. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Because you asked. Dominic's fingers traced the stem of his wine glass. And because if you're going to be in my life, you need to understand exactly what that means. I don't do lies, Lena, not with people who matter. And I matter? The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. His eyes met hers, dark and intense. From the moment you decided to save my life instead of following the rules, you mattered. The server returned with their first course, something elegant and artfully plated that Lena barely registered. The food wasn't why she was here. Tell me how you got shot, she said, pushing her plate aside. Dominic smiled slightly at her directness. There's a rival family, the Castellanos. They've been trying to expand into Russo territory for months. 3 nights ago, one of their soldiers thought he'd earn points by taking me out during a meeting that was supposed to be neutral ground. He shrugged, the movement careful because of his healing injury. He got off 1 shot before my people put him down. I got lucky. The bullet missed everything vital. That's not luck, Lena said. That's a miracle. Another inch to the right, and you'd have bled out before the ambulance arrived. Then I guess I owed someone a miracle. His expression softened. Or maybe you were my miracle, Lena. The universe's way of saying it wasn't my time yet. She should have scoffed at the sentimentality. Instead, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. What happened to the man who shot you? He's dead. Dominic's voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of emotion. That's how this world works. Someone tries to kill you, you eliminate the threat. Just like that? Lena heard the judgment in her own voice and couldn't suppress it. Someone dies and it's just business as usual? Yes. He didn't flinch from her reaction. I told you it was dark, Lena. This is what I mean. In my world, violence isn't an aberration. It's the language we speak. And I'm very fluent in it. She should have been horrified, should have thrown down her napkin and walked out, back to her safe, normal life where people didn't discuss murder over expensive wine. But something in his honesty held her there. He wasn't trying to romanticize his life or make himself seem heroic. He was showing her the truth, unflinching and ugly, giving her every reason to leave, which made her want to stay all the more. Why did you want to see me again? She asked instead. You could have just paid me and disappeared. Why risk bringing me into your world? Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his fingers still tracing that slow pattern on his wine glass. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more intimate. Because for 2 hours, while you were saving my life, I saw something in you that I've never seen before. Courage without calculation. Compassion without weakness. You looked at me, a stranger covered in blood who could have been anyone, and you chose to help instead of protect yourself. He paused. Do you know how rare that is? Real courage? Most people in my world only act brave when the odds are in their favor, but you gambled everything on a stranger's life. I'm a nurse, Lena said, trying to deflect the intensity of his words. Saving lives is what I do. No, he shook his head. You're a woman who risks everything for what she believes is right. That's not training, Lena, that's character. And it's the most dangerous and beautiful thing I've ever seen. The air between them felt charged, electric. Lena's pulse quickened, and she knew he could see it in the flutter of her throat. You don't know me, she said quietly. Not really. Then let me. Dominic reached across the table, his hand extended palm up in invitation. Let me know you, Lena. Let me see if that courage I saw in the emergency room is real or if it was just adrenaline and good training. She should have refused, should have kept the distance that would protect her when this inevitably ended badly. Instead, she placed her hand in his, felt his fingers close around hers with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about the violence he was capable of. I'm not looking for a relationship, she said, even as her fingers tightened around his. I don't date criminals. His smile was slow and devastating. I'm not asking you to date me, Lena. I'm asking you to see me. The man beneath the monster. The person I am when the violence stops and the world goes quiet. And who are you when the world goes quiet? Lonely, he admitted, and the raw honesty in that single word broke something open inside her chest. Tired. Wondering if there's more to existence than power and territory and the constant calculation of threats. That's not a very Mafia boss thing to say. No, he agreed. It's not. But you wanted honesty, so here it is. I'm 31 years old and I've spent the last decade building an empire I'm not sure I even want. I inherited this life from my father and his father before him, and I've never questioned whether there might be something else, something better. Until now? Lena heard the hope in her own voice and tried to suppress it. Until you. His thumb traced a circle on the back of her hand, the same gesture he'd made in the emergency room. You saved my life, Lena, and in doing that, you made me wonder if it's a life worth saving. Everyone's life is worth saving. Even monsters? Especially monsters. She squeezed his hand, because maybe they just need someone to show them how to be human again. Something shifted in Dominic's expression. Surprise or recognition, or maybe just the acknowledgement that she understood something fundamental about him that most people never would. They talked through dinner, through wine and courses that kept appearing and disappearing without Lena noticing what she was eating. Dominic told her about growing up in a world where violence was currency and trust was rarer than diamonds. About taking over the family business at 25 when his father had a stroke that left him incapacitated. About the weight of responsibility and the isolation of power. And Lena found herself talking too, about the burnout that had driven her to night shifts where she could focus on patients instead of politics, about the loneliness of a career that consumed all her energy and left nothing for relationships, about the restlessness that had been growing in her for months before that Tuesday night when Dominic had crashed into her life. By the time their plates were cleared and coffee appeared, Lena realized hours had passed. The restaurant had grown quieter, the murmur of other conversations fading as other diners departed. I should go, she said reluctantly, not wanting the evening to end but knowing it had to. I have an early shift tomorrow. I'll have someone drive you home. Dominic stood, came around the table to pull out her chair with that same old-fashioned courtesy. I can take a cab. Lena. His hand touched her lower back, gentle but firm. You're with me now. That means you don't take cabs in this neighborhood at night. That means you let me make sure you get home safely. She should have bristled at the possessiveness in his tone. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. Outside, a black sedan waited at the curb, engine running. Dominic opened the back door for her himself, then surprised her by sliding in beside her instead of saying goodbye on the sidewalk. I'm taking you home personally, he said, catching her questioning look. I want to see where you live. Make sure it's safe. It's a perfectly normal apartment building in a perfectly normal neighborhood. Nothing about you is perfectly normal, Lena Carter. The drive took 20 minutes through city streets that grew progressively less polished as they left the restaurant district. Lena's neighborhood wasn't dangerous exactly, but it was definitely several tax brackets below the world Dominic inhabited. When they pulled up to her building, a converted warehouse with decent security but nothing fancy, Dominic studied it with the same assessing gaze his guard had used on her at the restaurant. You live here alone? With a roommate, Maya. She's a pastry chef. What floor? Third. Why? Instead of answering, Dominic got out of the car and came around to open her door. I'm walking you up. That's really not necessary. Lena. He took her hand, helped her out of the car. Let me do this. Let me make sure you're safe. So she led him through the lobby, into the elevator, down the hallway to apartment 3F. She could feel his attention cataloging every detail. The security cameras, the locks, the proximity to the stairs and elevator. At her door, she turned to face him. See? Perfectly safe. I'll be fine. Lock this behind me, he said, not moving, and call me when you get home from your shifts. Just a text so I know you're okay. Dominic, please. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. You matter to me, Lena. Let me protect you. She should have refused, should have established boundaries and maintained independence. Instead, she heard herself whisper, okay. His smile was worth the surrender. He leaned down, and for a breathless moment, Lena thought he was going to kiss her. But instead, his lips brushed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. Get some sleep, he murmured against her skin. I'll call you tomorrow. Then he was gone, striding back toward the elevator, leaving Lena standing in her doorway with her heart racing and her world tilted completely off its axis. Inside her apartment, Maya looked up from the couch where she was watching some cooking competition show. Who was that? She asked, her eyes wide. Because that was definitely not a normal friend dropping you off. Lena locked the door behind her, Dominic's instructions still echoing in her mind. That was Dominic. And Dominic is complicated. Complicated gorgeous or complicated dangerous? Lena thought about Dominic's honesty over dinner, about the loneliness in his eyes and the violence in his world. Both. Maya turned off the TV, her full attention on Lena now. Okay, you need to tell me everything, and I mean everything. So Lena did, leaving out only the parts about gunshot wounds and crime families. She told Maya about meeting someone unexpected, about dinner at a mysterious restaurant, about feeling more alive in one evening than she had in months of her regular life. He sounds intense, Maya said when Lena finished. Are you going to see him again? I don't know. Lena curled up in the chair across from the couch. He warned me that his world is dark, that getting involved with him means accepting things most people can't handle. And can you handle it? That was the question, wasn't it? Could she handle loving a man whose life was built on violence? Could she reconcile the Dominic who held her hand tenderly with the Dominic who ordered executions without hesitation? I think I want to try, Lena admitted quietly. Maya studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then be careful. But don't be so careful that you miss out on something real. Lena went to bed that night with her phone on the nightstand, waiting for Dominic's promised call. It came at 11:30, just as she was drifting off to sleep. You're home safe? His voice was rough, tired. Yes. Locked the door and everything. Good. A pause. I can't stop thinking about you. Lena smiled in the darkness. Is that a problem? The biggest one I've had in years. But he sounded pleased rather than concerned. Sleep well, Lena. You too, Dominic. And somehow, despite everything logic and reason told her about the danger of getting involved with a man like him, Lena slept better that night than she had in months. The next 3 weeks unfolded in a pattern of stolen moments and secret meetings. Dominic would call late at night, his voice low and intimate, telling her about his day in carefully edited terms that left out the violence but revealed the exhaustion of leading an empire. Lena would talk about her patients, the small victories and heartbreaking losses of the emergency room, and Dominic would listen like every word mattered. They met when they could, always at places Dominic chose, always with security Lena pretended not to notice. Another dinner at Salvatore's. A walk through the botanical gardens at midnight when the public was gone and Dominic could arrange private access. Coffee at dawn in a cafe Dominic's family apparently owned, though he never explicitly said so. And slowly, Lena began to see the man beneath the monster. Dominic was brilliant, sharp and strategic, able to read people and situations with uncanny accuracy. He was generous, leaving tips that were probably more than the entire bill. and making donations to causes he believed in with quiet anonymity. He was protective to a fault, insisting on knowing her schedule and having people watch her building, even though she insisted it was unnecessary. And he was lonely in a way that broke her heart. "Do you have friends?" she asked him one night as they sat in his car, overlooking the city from a hilltop park his people had somehow cleared of other visitors. "I have associates, business partners, people who need me or fear me or both." He stared out at the glittering lights below. "But friends? People who care about me instead of what I can do for them? No, Lena, I don't have friends." "That's sad. That's my life." He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "But then you came along and made me wonder if maybe I've been doing it wrong all these years." "How so?" "I've spent my entire adult life building walls, keeping people at a distance because closeness means vulnerability, and vulnerability gets you killed in my world." His hand found hers in the space between their seats. "But you walked right through all those walls like they didn't exist. And instead of feeling exposed, I feel alive." Lena understood exactly what he meant. She felt it too, that electric awareness, that sense of possibility that had been missing from her carefully controlled existence. "I'm falling for you," she admitted, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I know it's fast, and I know it's probably a terrible idea, but I can't help it." Dominic's response was to pull her across the console into his lap, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was both gentle and consuming. Lena melted into him, her hands tangling in his hair, her body pressed against his in the confined space of the car. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling too," he whispered. "And you're right, it's a terrible idea. But I don't care." That night marked a shift in their relationship. The stolen kisses became longer, deeper. The conversations grew more intimate, revealing secrets and vulnerabilities neither of them shared easily. And Lena found herself pulled deeper into Dominic's world, meeting the people who surrounded him, seeing glimpses of the empire he controlled. She met Marcus, his second-in-command, and the closest thing Dominic had to a friend. Met the guards who protected him with absolute loyalty. Met the accountant who managed the legitimate businesses that provided cover for the illegal ones. And she began to understand the complexity of Dominic's world, that it wasn't simple good versus evil, but a gray landscape where people made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. But then, 6 weeks into their relationship, everything changed. Dominic called her at midnight, his voice tight with a tension she'd never heard before. "I need to see you tonight. Can you meet me at the warehouse on 7th? "What's wrong?" "Just, please, Lena, I need you." She went, of course, threw on clothes and grabbed a cab, her heart pounding with worry. The warehouse was in an industrial district that looked abandoned, but Lena knew by now that appearances in Dominic's world were usually deceiving. He was waiting inside, pacing like a caged animal. When he saw her, he crossed the space in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "Dominic, what happened?" "My father," his voice was muffled against her hair. "He knows about you." Lena's blood went cold. Dominic had been careful to keep their relationship hidden precisely because of his father, Antonio Russo, the patriarch who had built the empire Dominic now ran, who was supposedly retired due to his stroke but still wielded enormous influence. "How?" "Someone saw us together. Someone who reports directly to him." Dominic pulled back, his hands gripping her shoulders. "He's demanding I end this. Says you're a liability, a weakness that could be exploited." "And what did you tell him?" His eyes were anguished. "I told him I'd handle it." The words hit like a physical blow. "Handle it? What does that mean?" "It means he wants you gone, Lena. Out of my life. Out of the city. He's threatening to have you killed if I don't make you disappear voluntarily." The world tilted. Lena had known Dominic's life was dangerous, had accepted the violence as an abstract concept. But this was personal, immediate, terrifying. "So what now?" She was proud that her voice stayed steady. "You're just going to do what he says?" "No." Dominic's grip tightened. "I'm going to figure out a way to keep you safe while I deal with my father. You're going to choose." Lena pulled free from his grasp. "That's what this comes down to, isn't it? Choose me or choose your empire." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." She could feel tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. "Your father gave you an ultimatum. So now I'm giving you one too. Either you stand up to him, tell him I matter more than his approval, or you let me go right now and we stop pretending this could ever work. Dominic looked like she'd struck him. Lena, you don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. She took a step back, needing distance. I understand that I've spent 6 weeks falling in love with a man who's still living in his father's shadow, who talks about wanting something different but isn't brave enough to actually take it. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Dominic. The anger felt good, better than the fear. You think I don't know what I'm risking by being with you? I've given up my privacy, my safety, my peace of mind. I've accepted that loving you means living with danger. But I did it because I thought you were worth it, because I thought you were strong enough to choose your own life instead of the one your father planned for you. He stared at her, something breaking in his expression. I need time. No. Lena's voice was final. You don't get time. You get right now, this moment, to decide what matters more, keeping me safe by sending me away, or keeping me in your life and fighting for us. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Dominic spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Give me 2 weeks. What? 2 weeks to handle my father, to make arrangements, to ensure we can be together without him hanging over us like a death sentence. He reached for her hands. I'm not choosing him over you, Lena. I'm choosing to protect you while I dismantle the threat. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Lena wanted to refuse, wanted to demand immediate action, immediate commitment, but she saw the desperation in his eyes, the genuine fear for her safety beneath the determination. 2 weeks, she agreed quietly. But Dominic, if you betray this trust, if you choose him over me, there's no coming back from that. I'll walk away and I'll never look back. I know. He pulled her close again, his lips finding hers in a kiss that tasted like promise and desperation. I swear to you, Lena, 2 weeks and we're done hiding. 2 weeks and I choose you over everything. She believed him. That was her first mistake. The 2 weeks that followed were the strangest of Lena's life. Dominic became a ghost, present in text messages and late-night phone calls, but physically absent in a way that made her chest ache with loneliness. He was handling things, he told her, making arrangements, ensuring their future would be secure. She tried to believe him. On day 3, a security team appeared outside her apartment building. Dominic hadn't asked permission, had simply stationed guards to watch her 24 hours a day. When Lena called to protest, his voice had been firm and unyielding. My father knows about you now, which makes you a target. Either you accept protection, or I move you to a safe house where I can guarantee your safety. Your choice. She'd chosen the guards, if only to maintain some semblance of her normal life. On day 7, Maya confronted her while they shared a rare dinner together in their apartment. Okay, I've been patient, Maya said, setting down her fork with deliberate precision. But you need to tell me what's really going on. You've got men in black suits watching our building like we're in a witness protection program. You barely sleep. And you look at your phone every 30 seconds like you're waiting for news about a terminal diagnosis. Lena had been carefully editing her relationship with Dominic whenever she talked to Maya, keeping the dangerous parts vague, downplaying the criminal empire aspect. But sitting across from her best friend, watching Maya's concerned eyes search her face, Lena found she couldn't maintain the facade anymore. I'm in love with a man whose father wants me dead, she said quietly. Maya's fork clattered to her plate. What? So Lena told her everything. About Dominic's world, about the violence and power and complicated morality that governed his existence. About falling for him anyway, despite knowing better. About Antonio Russo's ultimatum and Dominic's promise to fix things within 2 weeks. When she finished, Maya was silent for a long moment, her expression cycling through shock, concern, and something that might have been fear. Lena, she finally said, her voice careful. You understand how insane this sounds, right? You're a nurse, you save lives, and you're in love with a mob boss whose family literally wants to kill you. I know. And you're just waiting, trusting that he'll magically make this dangerous situation disappear? He promised. Even to her own ears, Lena sounded desperate. He swore he'd choose me. Maya reached across the table, gripping Lena's hand tightly. I love you. You're my best friend. So I'm going to say this as gently as I can. Men like that don't change. They don't walk away from power, and they definitely don't choose ordinary women over criminal empires. Dominic's different. Is he? Maya's eyes were kind but firm. Because from where I'm sitting, he's already chosen. He's chosen to keep you hidden, to station guards outside like your property to be protected, to ask you to wait while he handles things with his father. That's not love, Lena. That's ownership. The words hit harder because part of Lena had been thinking the same thing during the long, lonely nights. But she couldn't admit that, couldn't acknowledge the growing doubt that whispered Maya might be right. You don't know him like I do, Lena said instead. No, Maya agreed, but I know you. And the Lena I know doesn't wait for men to save her. She saves herself. That conversation haunted Lena through day 8, 9, and 10. She found herself analyzing every interaction with Dominic, questioning whether what they had was real love or just the intoxicating illusion of being chosen by someone powerful. On day 11, Dominic finally called with actual news instead of vague reassurances. I need to see you, he said, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't identify. Tonight. The warehouse on 7th, same as before. What's happening? I'll explain everything when you get there. But Lena... He paused, and she could hear something that sounded like strain in his breathing. Pack a bag. Enough for a few days. We might need to leave the city sooner than planned. Her heart leaped. You did it? You handled things with your father? Just pack the bag and meet me, please. He hung up before she could ask more questions, leaving Lena staring at her phone with a mixture of hope and apprehension churning in her stomach. She packed quickly, clothes, toiletries, her passport just in case. Maya watched from the doorway of Lena's bedroom, her expression worried. Are you sure about this? Maya asked. No, Lena admitted, but I have to see it through. I have to know if he meant what he said. And if he didn't? Lena zipped her bag closed with more force than necessary. Then I'll come home, drink an entire bottle of wine with you, and spend the next year getting over the biggest mistake of my life. Maya hugged her tightly. Text me when you get there. And Lena, if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you get out. Promise me. I promise. The warehouse looked exactly the same as it had 11 days ago, but Lena felt different as she approached it, more cautious, more aware of the risk she was taking by being here. The guards at the entrance recognized her, waved her through without the usual security check. Inside, Dominic stood by the same windows where he'd paced before, his silhouette dark against the city lights beyond. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and Lena's breath caught at his expression. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, tension in every line of his body, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Lena. Her name sounded like relief and regret in equal measure. What happened? She set down her bag, stayed near the entrance. Something in his posture made her wary. Did you talk to your father? I did. Dominic crossed to the small table in the corner, poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter. He didn't offer her one. We had a long conversation about you, about us, about what I want versus what the family needs. And? He took a long swallow of whatever was in his glass, whiskey probably, given the amber color. He made me an offer, a compromise. Lena's stomach dropped. In her experience, compromises in Dominic's world usually meant someone lost everything while pretending they'd won something. What kind of compromise? There's a marriage alliance on the table. Has been for months, actually. The Laurent family. They control the Northern Territories, everything from the waterfront to the industrial district. If our families unite through marriage, we'd control almost the entire city. Dominic still hadn't looked at her, was staring into his glass like it held answers. My father has been pushing for this alliance since before I met you. He wants me to marry Victoria Laurent. The name landed like a physical blow. Lena had heard it before. Victoria Laurent, the beautiful and ruthless daughter of Jean Laurent, educated at the finest European schools, fluent in 5 languages, reportedly as dangerous as she was elegant. And you said no. Lena tried to make it a statement, but it came out as a question. Dominic finally met her eyes, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. I told him I needed time to think about it. The betrayal was so sharp, so complete, that for a moment Lena couldn't breathe. You told him you'd think about it? Dominic, we're supposed to be leaving together. You promised. I know what I promised. His voice was harsh, defensive. But you don't understand the pressure I'm under. This isn't just about what I want, Lena. This is about the entire family, about maintaining power, about preventing a war that would kill hundreds of people. So you're choosing them. The words tasted like ash. After everything you said, after asking me to wait, to trust you, you're choosing your father's empire over us. It's not that simple. Stop saying that. Lena's voice cracked with fury and heartbreak. It is that simple. You either love me enough to fight for us, or you don't. There's no compromise, no middle ground. Either we're together or we're not. Dominic slammed his glass down on the table hard enough that Lena flinched. You think I don't want to fight for you? You think I don't hate every second of this? But if I refuse this marriage, my father will have you killed, Lena. Not as punishment, as strategy. He'll eliminate you to prove I have no weaknesses, and then he'll force the marriage anyway. So your solution is to marry her yourself? To save my life by breaking my heart? My solution is to keep you alive. His composure finally cracked, revealing the anguish beneath. Don't you understand? I love you too much to let you die for me. If marrying Victoria means you get to live, means you get to have the normal life you deserve instead of being dragged down into my darkness, then that's what I'll do. Lena stared at him, tears burning hot tracks down her cheeks. That's not love, Dominic. That's cowardice disguised as sacrifice. He recoiled like she'd struck him. What? You heard me. She grabbed her bag, anger giving her strength. Real love doesn't make decisions for the other person. Real love trusts them enough to fight together. But you'd rather play the martyr, the tragic hero who gives up his love to keep her safe. Well, I don't need your protection. I need your courage. And you just proved you don't have it. Lena, wait. No. She backed toward the door. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I'm walking away from you, from this world, from everything we could have been. And Dominic? When you're standing at that altar with Victoria Laurent, I hope you remember this moment. I hope you remember the woman who loved you enough to risk everything, and how you threw that away because you were too afraid to do the same. She left before he could respond, before the tears blinding her could make her stumble. Behind her, she heard glass shatter against a wall, heard Dominic roar her name in a voice raw with desperation. But she didn't turn back. The guards let her pass without comment, their faces carefully neutral. Outside, Lena managed to make it 2 blocks before her legs gave out and she sank onto a bench, sobbing so hard she thought she might be sick. Her phone buzzed continuously, Dominic calling, texting, leaving voicemails she deleted without listening to. She blocked his number, blocked Marcus's number when he tried calling too, blocked every connection to that world she could think of. Then she called Maya. Come get me, she managed to say through her tears. Please, I need to come home. Maya arrived in 15 minutes, a trip that should have taken 30, and found Lena still sitting on that bench, mascara streaked down her face, clutching her bag like a lifeline. Oh, honey. Maya wrapped her arms around Lena, let her cry into her shoulder. I'm so sorry. You were right, Lena choked out. You were right about everything. He chose the empire, he chose power, and I was stupid enough to think I could compete with that. You're not stupid, you're in love. And sometimes love makes us hope for things that were never going to happen. They sat there for a long time, until Lena's tears finally ran dry, and she could breathe without her chest hitching. Then Maya drove her home, settled her on the couch with tea and tissues, and let her talk until she had nothing left to say. The next morning, Lena woke to discover the security team was gone. Dominic had withdrawn his protection, which should have felt like freedom, but instead felt like abandonment. She went to work because she didn't know what else to do. Lost herself in the familiar routine of the emergency room, in the immediate and concrete needs of patients who required her skills instead of her heart. And for 3 days, she successfully avoided thinking about Dominic Russo. Then, on the 4th day, Maya came home with a newspaper and a stricken expression. Lena, she said quietly, setting the paper on the kitchen table. I'm sorry. I know you said you didn't want to know, but I think you need to see this. The headline screamed across the front page, Russo-Laurent Alliance sealed, wedding of the decade set for this weekend. Below it, a photo showed Dominic and Victoria Laurent at what appeared to be their engagement announcement. Victoria was stunning in a designer dress, her hand resting possessively on Dominic's arm. And Dominic looked exactly as he always did, powerful, controlled, untouchable. Not like a man who'd claimed to be in love with someone else just 4 days ago. Lena read the article with a detachment that felt like shock. The wedding would take place at St. Augustine's Cathedral. The reception would be held at the Elysium Hotel, It was being called a historic moment for the city's power structure, a unification that would reshape everything. And Dominic Russo, the article noted, looked every inch the satisfied groom. That was when Lena's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She almost deleted it, almost threw her phone across the room and let herself sink into the numbness that had been her only defense against the pain. But something made her open it. Transfer received $500,000. From D. Russo. Message, I'm sorry, take this and disappear. Don't try to contact me, it's safer this way. D. Lena stared at the message for a long time, her emotions cycling through hurt, rage, and finally something that felt like clarity. Dominic thought he could pay her off, thought he could make their entire relationship disappear with a bank transfer and a dismissive message, thought she would just fade quietly into the background while he married Victoria and consolidated his power. He had gravely underestimated her. Maya found her 20 minutes later, dressed in the black dress she'd worn to their first dinner, her makeup carefully applied to hide the evidence of crying, her expression set in determined lines. What are you doing? Maya asked warily. Going to a wedding reception. Lena checked her reflection one final time, satisfied with what she saw. Not a heartbroken woman, but someone strong enough to demand answers. Lena, that's insane. Probably. She grabbed her purse, checked that she had everything she needed. But I'm done being the woman who quietly disappears when powerful men decide she's inconvenient. Dominic wants to marry Victoria? Fine. But he's going to face me first. He's going to tell me to my face why he chose her. This is dangerous. I don't care. Lena headed for the door. I spent 6 weeks falling in love with a man who turned out to be a coward. The least he can do is own that cowardice to my face instead of hiding behind bank transfers and security guards. Maya caught her arm before she could leave. If you're doing this, I'm coming with you. Maya, no arguments. You're my best friend and you're about to do something incredibly stupid and brave. I'm not letting you do it alone. So they went together, Maya driving while Lena sat in the passenger seat trying to calm her racing heart. The Elysium Hotel glittered like a beacon in the night, its entrance swarming with luxury cars and security personnel. Getting in would be impossible, Lena realized as they approached. This was a private event, invitation only, probably with the kind of security that could identify threats before they got within 100 feet of the building. But she hadn't come this far to be turned away. I need you to cause a scene, Lena told Maya as they pulled up to the valet stand. Something that will distract the security at the entrance long enough for me to slip past. Maya looked at her like she was crazy. What kind of scene? I don't know. Faint? Scream? Whatever you can think of that will get everyone looking at you instead of me. You realize this is absolutely insane, right? Completely. Lena squeezed her hand. But will you do it anyway? Maya sighed, then nodded. For you? Yeah. But if we end up arrested or dead, I'm haunting you in the afterlife. They exited the car, and Lena stayed close to Maya as they approached the entrance. The security team was exactly as professional and intimidating as she'd expected. Men in dark suits with earpieces, eyes that cataloged every approaching person. 30 feet from the door, Maya suddenly stumbled, let out a theatrical gasp, and collapsed onto the sidewalk. Oh my God, she screamed. My ankle! I think it's broken. It was beautifully done. Immediately, 2 security guards rushed over, along with several concerned guests who'd been approaching the entrance. In the confusion, Lena slipped past the distracted security team and into the hotel lobby. Her heart pounded as she moved quickly but carefully through the opulent space, following the signs that pointed toward the Imperial Ballroom. She could hear music and laughter ahead, could see the glow of elegant lighting spilling from the ballroom entrance. And then she was inside, standing at the edge of a reception that looked like something out of a fairy tale. The ballroom was spectacular, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across a sea of elegantly dressed guests, champagne flowing freely, an orchestra playing soft classical music in one corner. At the center of it all, on a slightly raised platform, Dominic and Victoria stood greeting guests, the perfect picture of a powerful couple. Victoria was even more stunning in person than in photographs, her white reception gown a masterpiece of couture, her dark hair swept up in an elegant style that showcased her graceful neck. She smiled at guests with practiced charm, her hand never leaving Dominic's arm. And Dominic looked like he belonged there. In his impeccable tuxedo, his expression composed and controlled, He looked every inch the Mafia boss who'd just secured a strategic alliance through marriage. Lena felt her courage waver. What was she doing here? What could she possibly say that would change anything? But then Dominic's eyes swept the room and locked on hers, and she saw his entire expression change. Shock, then horror, then something that looked like panic crossed his face. He said something to Victoria, who looked in Lena's direction with an expression of cool assessment. Then he was moving toward her, cutting through the crowd with single-minded determination. Lena stood her ground, lifted her chin, and waited for the confrontation she'd come here to force. "What are you doing here?" Dominic's voice was low, urgent, as he reached her. "Lena, you shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "I got your message," she said calmly, though her heart was racing. The money, the dismissal, the instruction to disappear, very generous, very final. "This isn't the place." "No, this is exactly the place." She gestured to the ballroom, to Victoria watching them with sharp eyes from across the room. "You wanted me to disappear quietly while you married her. But I'm not wired that way, Dominic. You don't get to erase me without at least having the courage to explain why to my face." He glanced around, clearly aware they were starting to attract attention. Several guests were watching their exchange with barely concealed curiosity. "Come with me," he said, his hand on her elbow. "Let me explain somewhere private." "No." She pulled free. "You explain here, now, in front of all these people who've come to celebrate your strategic alliance. Tell me why you chose this." She gestured to the opulent reception, the waiting bride, the assembled power brokers. "Over what we had." "To keep you alive," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I told you that. My father threatened to kill you if I didn't marry Victoria, so I made the choice that would ensure you lived, even if it meant losing you. And you never thought to ask me what I wanted?" Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "You never considered that maybe I'd rather face danger with you than safety without you?" "I couldn't risk it. Because you're a coward." The words came out quiet but devastating. "You talk about protecting me, about keeping me safe, but what you really did was make the easy choice. Marrying Victoria maintains your power, keeps your father happy, preserves the empire. Choosing me would have been hard. It would have required courage, sacrifice, the willingness to fight for something more important than territory and control." Dominic looked like she'd shot him. "That's not fair." "Life isn't fair, Dominic. You taught me that." She took a step back, needing distance. "I came here tonight because I needed to see if there was any part of the man I fell in love with still inside you. If there was any chance you'd realize what you were giving up and choose differently." "Lena, but I see now that man never really existed. He was a fantasy I created, a version of you I wanted to believe in. The real Dominic Russo is standing right here, choosing power, choosing duty, choosing everything except the one thing that actually mattered." She saw the moment her words hit home, saw genuine anguish flash across his face. "I love you," he said desperately. "That was never a lie, Lena. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone." "I know." Her voice broke slightly. "That's what makes this so tragic. You love me, but you don't love me enough. Not enough to be brave. Not enough to fight. Not enough to choose me over this world that's slowly killing everything good inside you." Someone appeared at Dominic's shoulder, Marcus, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes holding a warning. "Boss, Victoria is asking about the delay." "Tell her I need a minute," Dominic snapped without looking away from Lena. But Lena was already turning away, had already said everything she came here to say. "Goodbye, Dominic," she said quietly. "Enjoy your empire. I hope it keeps you warm at night." She walked toward the exit with her head high and her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, knowing that every step away from him was the right choice, even though it felt like dying. Behind her, she heard him call her name one more time, heard the desperation in his voice, but she didn't turn around. Outside, she found Maya waiting anxiously by their car, her injured ankle miraculously healed. "Well?" Maya asked as Lena approached. "It's done." Lena slid into the passenger seat, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "It's over." Maya started the car without another word, and they drove through the city streets in silence. Lena watched the lights blur past and tried to feel something other than the hollow ache in her chest. She had walked away from Dominic Russo. She had demanded courage and found cowardice. She had loved and lost and survived. And somehow, that would have to be enough. The days following the reception blurred together in a haze of mechanical routine. Lena went to work, came home, slept when exhaustion finally overtook grief, and woke to do it all again. She existed rather than lived, moving through her shifts at the hospital with the kind of detached competence that her colleagues probably attributed to professionalism rather than emotional numbness. Maya tried to help, offering distractions in the form of girls' nights and experimental desserts and long conversations about anything except Dominic Russo. But even Maya's determined cheerfulness couldn't penetrate the hollow space where Lena's heart used to be. A week after the confrontation, Lena made a decision. She couldn't stay in this city anymore. Everywhere she looked, she saw reminders of Dominic, the restaurant district where Salvatore's existed in its secret elegance, the botanical gardens where they'd walked at midnight, even the hospital where she'd first saved his life. The memories were suffocating her, making it impossible to move forward. She needed to leave. Start over somewhere new, somewhere without ghosts. That evening, she sat Maya down at their kitchen table and explained her plan. "I'm taking the money Dominic sent," Lena said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "Not because I want it, but because I've earned it. I gave 6 weeks of my life to him, risked my safety, opened my heart. That money is compensation for everything he took from me." Maya's eyes were sad but understanding. "Where will you go?" "West. Maybe California, maybe Oregon, somewhere with ocean and space and enough distance that I can breathe again." Lena wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, seeking warmth against the cold that seemed permanently settled in her chest. "I'll find a new hospital, rent a small apartment, start building a life that doesn't revolve around missing someone who was never really mine." "When?" 2 weeks. I need to give the hospital proper notice, pack up my things, figure out the logistics." She reached across the table, gripped Maya's hand. "I'm going to miss you. You know that, right? You're the best friend I've ever had." Maya's eyes welled with tears. "Then take me with you." Lena blinked in surprise. "What?" "Take me with you," Maya repeated, squeezing Lena's hand tightly. "I'm serious. There's nothing keeping me here except a job I could do anywhere and an apartment I share with my best friend. If you're starting over, let's start over together. 2 women against the world building new lives in a new city." "Maya, you don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. I want to." Maya's smile was watery but genuine. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you actually deal with your feelings instead of burying them under work and pretending you're fine." For the first time since the reception, Lena felt something crack in the numbness surrounding her heart. Not breaking, cracking, letting in a sliver of light that felt almost like hope. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's do it together." They spent the next 2 weeks planning their exodus. Maya gave notice at the bakery where she worked. Lena met with her supervisor at Mercy General, explaining that she was relocating for personal reasons and would be leaving at the end of the month. They researched cities along the West Coast, finally settling on a small town in Northern California that boasted a community hospital in need of emergency room nurses and a thriving food scene that would welcome a talented pastry chef. Lena donated most of her furniture, packed her life into boxes that would be shipped ahead, and tried very hard not to think about the fact that she was running away. It wasn't running, she told herself. It was choosing herself. Choosing a future that didn't include waiting for a man who had proven he would always choose power over love. 3 days before their planned departure, Marcus appeared at Lena's apartment. She opened the door to find Dominic's second-in-command standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable in a way she'd never seen during their previous encounters. His usual air of dangerous competence was undermined by the uncertainty in his eyes. "Miss Carter," he said formally, "I need to speak with you. May I come in?" Lena's first instinct was to slam the door in his face, but curiosity won over self-preservation. "You have 5 minutes," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. Marcus walked into the small living room, took in the packed boxes and bare walls, and his expression tightened. "You're leaving." "Yes, in 3 days. Was there something you needed, or did you just come to state the obvious?" He turned to face her, and Lena was surprised to see genuine concern in his eyes. "I came to tell you the truth about what happened. The truth Dominic won't tell you because he thinks protecting you means keeping you in the dark." Lena's heart stuttered. "What truth?" Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolled through it, then held it out to show her a photograph. The image showed Dominic in what appeared to be his office, and the devastation on his face made Lena's breath catch. He looked destroyed, eyes red-rimmed, face haggard, his normally perfect composure completely shattered. "This was taken the night after you confronted him at the reception," Marcus said quietly. "He destroyed half his office, broke everything he could reach. Then he sat on the floor surrounded by the wreckage and told me he'd made the biggest mistake of his life." Lena forced herself to look away from the photo. "If this is supposed to make me feel sorry for him, it's not." Marcus put the phone away. "It's supposed to make you understand what you couldn't see. Dominic didn't choose the Empire over you, Miss Carter. He chose your life over his happiness. He told me that at the reception. It's still cowardice." "Is it?" Marcus's voice was sharp now, challenging. "3 days before you confronted him at the warehouse, the night he told you about his father's ultimatum, Antonio Russo didn't just threaten to kill you. He had men watching you, following your every move, documenting your routines, your friends, your vulnerabilities. He showed Dominic photographs of you leaving work, getting coffee with Maya, sleeping in your apartment with the window open because you liked the night air." Ice flooded Lena's veins. "What?" "Antonio told Dominic that if he didn't marry Victoria, you would die. Not quickly, not painlessly. You would disappear piece by piece while Dominic was forced to watch. And then after you were gone, Antonio would kill everyone you cared about, Maya, your colleagues, the nurses you mentored at the hospital, just to make sure Dominic understood the cost of defiance." Lena sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know what he was protecting you from." Marcus sat in the chair across from her, his expression grave. "Dominic married Victoria to save your life, yes. But more than that, he married her to disarm his father. To make Antonio believe he'd won, that Dominic had fallen in line, that you were no longer a threat. The security team he pulled from your building, they didn't disappear. They're still watching you, still keeping you safe. You just can't see them anymore." "I don't understand." Lena's voice was barely a whisper. "If all of this is true, why didn't he just tell me?" "Because he knew you'd do exactly what you're doing now. Question whether his choice was right, whether there might have been another way. He didn't want you spending your life looking over your shoulder, wondering if Antonio's threat was still active." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Dominic loves you enough to let you hate him if it means you stay alive. That's not cowardice, Miss Carter. That's the most courageous thing I've ever seen him do." Lena felt tears burning down her cheeks. "Then why did he send me money like I was some problem to be solved? Why did he tell me to disappear? Because the only way to guarantee your safety was to make you invisible to his father's world. As long as you stayed in the city, stayed connected to Dominic in any way, you were a target. The money was supposed to give you the freedom to start over somewhere far away, to build a life where Antonio Russo's threats couldn't reach you. This doesn't change anything." Lena wiped at her tears angrily. "He still made the decision for me. He still chose to sacrifice our relationship instead of fighting for it." "You're right," Marcus agreed, surprising her. "He did make that choice, and he knows it cost him everything that mattered. But Miss Carter, I need you to understand something. In Dominic's world, there was no fighting option. There was only survival or death, and he chose your survival over his own happiness." Lena closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of what Marcus was telling her. All this time, she'd believed Dominic had chosen power and duty over love. But if Marcus was telling the truth, Dominic had chosen her life over everything else, including his own chance at happiness. "Why are you telling me this now?" she finally asked. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing." Marcus stood, straightened his jacket. "I'm telling you because Dominic asked me to. He said if you were leaving the city, you deserved to know the whole truth before you left. He wanted you to understand that everything he did, the marriage, the money, pushing you away, was about keeping you safe, not about choosing his empire." "And what am I supposed to do with this information?" Marcus headed toward the door, paused with his hand on the knob. "That's up to you. But Dominic wanted me to give you something." He pulled an envelope from his jacket, set it on the table by the door. "He wrote you a letter. He's been writing it every night since the reception, trying to explain what he couldn't say to your face." Then he was gone, leaving Lena alone with the envelope and the devastating knowledge that everything she'd believed about Dominic's betrayal might have been wrong. She stared at the envelope for hours, afraid of what it might contain. Finally, as midnight approached, she opened it with trembling hands. The letter was 12 pages long, written in Dominic's precise handwriting, and it destroyed her. He detailed everything Marcus had told her and more. The specific threats Antonio had made, The surveillance photos that had shown Lena's entire life mapped out like a target. The impossible choice between marrying Victoria or watching everyone Lena loved die. He explained how he'd negotiated with his father for days, trying to find some way to keep both Lena and his empire, before finally accepting that the only way to save her was to let her go. But it was the ending that broke Lena completely. I know you think I'm a coward, and maybe you're right. Maybe true courage would have been to burn down my entire world and run away with you. Damn the consequences. But Lena, I couldn't gamble with your life. I couldn't risk that my father would make good on his threats, and I would have to live with the knowledge that your death was my fault. So I made the only choice I could live with. I chose your life over my happiness. I married Victoria, consolidated the alliance, gave my father everything he wanted, and then I sent you away with enough money to build the life you deserve, far from the darkness of my world. You called me a coward at the reception, and those words haunt me. Because you're right. I wasn't brave enough to fight for us. I wasn't brave enough to risk everything for love. I was only brave enough to sacrifice my own happiness to ensure you lived. I'm writing this letter because Marcus told me you're leaving the city, and I needed you to know the truth before you left. Not because I want you to forgive me or come back. I don't deserve either. But because you deserve to know that every choice I made, no matter how much it hurt you, was made out of love. I hope you find happiness, Lena. I hope you build a beautiful life full of joy and safety and all the things my world could never give you. And I hope someday, when you think of me, you'll remember that I loved you enough to let you go. I will love you for the rest of my life, even if you hate me, even if you never think of me again. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend every day regretting that I wasn't brave enough to deserve you. Forever yours, even in absence, D. Lena read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before she finally understood the full scope of what Dominic had done. He hadn't chosen his empire. He'd chosen her survival, and in doing so, he'd condemned himself to a life married to a woman he didn't love, trapped in a world he'd been willing to leave, all to ensure Lena lived. It wasn't cowardice, it was the most devastating kind of love. Maya found her the next morning, still sitting on the couch with the letter clutched in her hands, her face swollen from crying. What happened? Maya asked, immediately concerned. So Lena told her everything. Marcus's visit, the truth about Antonio's threats, the letter that had rewritten her entire understanding of Dominic's betrayal. When she finished, Maya was quiet for a long time. So what are you going to do? She finally asked. I don't know. Lena's voice was raw from crying. He sacrificed everything to keep me safe. How am I supposed to just walk away from that? You're supposed to ask yourself if you can live with the choice he made. Maya sat beside her, took her hand. Because Lena, even if his reasons were noble, he still took away your agency. He still decided for you what was worth risking, and you need to figure out if you can forgive that. I don't know if I can. Lena looked down at the letter, at Dominic's precise handwriting declaring his love and his regret. But I also don't know if I can leave without at least trying to understand. Then don't leave. Maya squeezed her hand. Or at least don't leave yet. Take the time you need to figure out what you really want. Our new life in California will still be there next month if you decide that's what you need. Lena spent the next 2 days in an agony of indecision. Part of her wanted to stick to her plan, leave the city, start over, build a life that didn't involve Dominic Russo and his impossible choices. But another part, the part that had read his letter over and over until she'd memorized every word, couldn't stop thinking about the man who'd loved her enough to destroy his own happiness for her safety. On the 3rd day, the day she was supposed to leave, Lena made a decision. She asked Maya to delay their departure by 1 week. Just 1 week to get answers to the questions that were eating her alive. Then she did something she'd sworn she would never do. She called Marcus and asked him to arrange a meeting with Dominic. The response came within an hour. Dominic would meet her wherever she wanted, whenever she wanted. The choice was entirely hers. Lena chose the botanical gardens where they'd walked that midnight weeks ago. Neutral ground, beautiful and peaceful, far enough from Dominic's world that she could think clearly. She arrived at sunset, the gardens officially closed, but the gates mysteriously unlocked. Dominic's doing, she was sure. The paths were empty, the flowers glowing in the golden light, and Lena walked slowly toward the rose garden where she'd asked Marcus to tell Dominic she would be waiting. He was already there when she arrived, standing with his back to her, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders tight with tension. He looked different than he had at the reception, less polished, more human. His suit was expensive but rumpled, his hair disheveled, and when he turned at the sound of her footsteps, Lena saw the evidence of sleepless nights in the shadows under his eyes. Lena. Her name sounded like a prayer and a plea. I read your letter. She stopped a few feet away, maintaining distance. Marcus told me the truth about your father's threats. I should have told you myself. Dominic's voice was rough, strained. I should have trusted you with the truth instead of making decisions for you. Yes, you should have. Lena crossed her arms, kneading the barrier. But I understand now why you didn't. Why you thought protecting me meant keeping me in the dark. Does understanding mean you forgive me? I don't know yet. She met his eyes directly. I'm angry, Dominic. I'm angry that you took away my choice, that you decided my safety was more important than my autonomy. But I'm also... She paused, searching for the right words. I'm devastated by what you sacrificed, by the fact that you married Victoria and trapped yourself in a life you don't want, all to keep me alive. I'd do it again. His voice was immediate, certain. 1,000 times over, Lena. Your life is worth more than my happiness. That's not your decision to make. The words burst out of her, months of frustration and hurt finally finding voice. You keep talking about protecting me, about keeping me safe. But what about what I wanted? What about asking me if I was willing to risk danger to be with you? I couldn't ask that. Why not? Lena took a step forward, her eyes blazing. Because you thought I was too weak to handle it, too fragile to make my own choices about my own life? No. Dominic's composure cracked, revealing the anguish beneath. Because I couldn't bear the thought of you dying for me. I've lived my entire life surrounded by violence, Lena. I've seen what happens to the people caught in my father's crosshairs, and I wouldn't let that happen to you. So instead you broke my heart and married someone else. The tears she'd been fighting finally spilled over. You trapped yourself in a loveless marriage and sent me away with blood money, and you call that protection? I call it the only choice I could live with. His voice rose to match hers, raw with emotion. You want to know the truth? The real truth? I'm selfish enough that if I thought there was any way to keep you and keep you safe, I would have taken it. I would have burned down my entire empire, killed my own father if necessary, anything to have you in my life. But there was no way, Lena. My father had you surrounded, had people ready to kill you the moment I stepped out of line. So yes, I made the decision for you. And I'd make it again, because living in a world where you exist, even if you hate me, even if you never speak to me again, is better than living in a world where my selfishness got you killed. Lena stared at him, at the man she'd loved and lost and was somehow standing in front of again. His honesty was devastating, his pain so tangible she could feel it in her own chest. Your letter said you loved me enough to let me go, she said quietly. But Dominic, love without courage is just a beautiful lie. And you proved that night at the warehouse that you weren't brave enough to fight for us. You're right. He took a step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. I wasn't brave enough then. I was terrified of losing you, so I pushed you away before my father could take you from me. But Lena, I'm standing here now, telling you the truth you deserve. Doesn't that count for something? I don't know. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening air. I don't know if I can trust you again. I don't know if I can forgive you for making that choice, even if I understand why you made it. Then what do you need from me? Dominic's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Tell me what you need, and I'll give it to you. Anything. Lena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the powerful Mafia boss who controlled half the city, but a man who had sacrificed everything for love and was now standing in a garden at sunset, begging for a second chance he probably didn't deserve. I need time, she finally said. Time to process everything I've learned. Time to figure out if I can forgive you, or if the hurt is too deep to overcome. How much time? I don't know, maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe forever. She took a shaky breath. I was supposed to leave the city today, Dominic. Start a new life somewhere far away from you and your world. And I'm still going to leave, eventually, but not yet. Not until I've figured out what I really want. Something like hope flickered in his eyes. You're staying? For now, for 1 week at least. To think. To grieve. To decide if understanding your choice means I can forgive it. She moved toward him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. But Dominic, you need to understand something. Even if I forgive you, that doesn't mean we can be together. You're still married to Victoria. Your father is still a threat. Nothing about the impossible situation has actually changed. Everything has changed. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away the tears on her cheek. My father had a stroke 2 days ago, a massive one. The doctors say he won't recover consciousness. He's dying, Lena. She jerked back in shock. What? The stress of consolidating power after the wedding, the constant scheming, years of violence, it all caught up with him. He collapsed in his office during a meeting, and now he's on life support while the family decides when to let him go. Dominic's voice was flat, emotionless. I should feel something about that, grief or relief or anything, but all I can think is that the threat to you is dying with him. Lena's mind raced, trying to process this new information. So you're saying, I'm saying that in a few days, maybe a week, Antonio Russo will be dead, and when he dies, I'll be the undisputed head of the family, which means I'll have the power to make my own choices without fear of him retaliating against you. His eyes were intense, burning with something that looked like desperate hope. I can't undo marrying Victoria, but I can divorce her once my father is gone and the alliance is secure. I can make sure you're safe without sacrificing our future. Dominic? Lena didn't know what to say, how to feel about this sudden shift in their impossible situation. I know I don't deserve a second chance, he continued, his voice urgent now. I know I hurt you and broke your trust and made choices that you may never forgive. But Lena, if you can find it in yourself to give me another chance, to let me prove that I can be the man brave enough to fight for us, I swear I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. I need time, Lena repeated, though her resolve was wavering. I need to think about everything without you standing in front of me making promises that sound too good to be true. Take all the time you need. He pulled out a card, similar to the one he'd given her that first night in the hospital, and pressed it into her hand. When you're ready, call me. Whether it's tomorrow or next month or next year, I'll be waiting. And what about Victoria? Lena had to ask. What about your marriage? It's a contract, nothing more. We live in the same house but lead separate lives. She has her interests, I have mine. The marriage was about power, not love. Victoria knew that from the beginning. He paused, then added quietly, she also knows about you, knows that my heart belongs to someone else. Lena didn't know how to respond to that. The situation was impossibly complicated, tangled with politics and power, and the imminent death of a man who had threatened to kill her. I should go, she finally said, though part of her wanted to stay, to keep standing in this garden with Dominic, and pretend that love could solve all their problems. Okay. He stepped back, giving her space. But Lena, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. It's more than I deserved. She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and turned to leave. Lena? She paused, looked back. I meant what I said in the letter. I will love you for the rest of my life, whether you choose to forgive me or not, whether you call me tomorrow or never. You're it for me. You always will be. The words followed her all the way home, echoing in her mind like a promise and a curse in equal measure. Back at the apartment, Maya took one look at her face and pulled her into a tight hug. What happened? She asked gently. Everything changed, Lena whispered. His father is dying, which means the threat to me is dying with him, which means Dominic thinks we have a second chance. And what do you think? Lena pulled back, wiped at her eyes. I think I'm terrified, because part of me wants to forgive him, wants to believe that we could somehow make this work. But another part remembers how much it hurt when he chose his empire over me, and I don't know if I can risk going through that again. Then take the time you need to figure it out. Maya guided her to the couch, sat beside her. Don't make any decisions out of fear or hope or any other extreme emotion. Take the week, think it through, and trust yourself to know what's right. So that's what Lena did. She spent the next 3 days doing nothing but thinking, weighing what she knew against what she felt, trying to reconcile the man who had broken her heart with the man who had done it to save her life. And slowly, painfully, she began to understand that maybe there were no heroes or villains in this story, just two people who loved each other, trapped in impossible circumstances, trying to make the best choices they could with the information they had. Maybe that was enough. Or maybe it would never be enough. She still didn't know. On the fourth day, the news broke across every channel in the city. Antonio Russo, patriarch of the Russo crime family and one of the most powerful men in the underworld, had died at the age of 68. The official cause was listed as complications from a stroke, but everyone who understood the dynamics of power knew the real story. A lifetime of violence and ruthless ambition had finally caught up with him. Lena watched the coverage from her couch, Maya silent beside her, as reporters detailed Antonio's life with the kind of sanitized reverence reserved for men whose crimes were too numerous to mention on television. They showed footage of the funeral, a massive affair attended by hundreds of people in expensive black suits, all paying respects to a man most of them had probably feared more than loved. And there, at the center of it all, stood Dominic. The cameras caught him as he delivered the eulogy, his expression perfectly controlled, his voice steady as he spoke about legacy and family and duty. But Lena, who had learned to read the subtle tensions in his posture, could see what the cameras missed: the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched between sentences, the brief moment when his eyes closed, as if he was gathering strength to continue. He looked like a man enduring rather than grieving. Victoria stood beside him throughout the ceremony, her hand resting on his arm in a show of spousal support that looked perfect for the cameras, but felt hollow to anyone paying close attention. She was elegant in black, her expression appropriately solemn, playing her part in the theater of mob succession with practiced grace. After the broadcast ended, Lena sat in the silence of her apartment and tried to figure out what she was feeling. Relief that the man who had threatened to kill her was gone? Sympathy for Dominic, who had just lost his father despite their complicated relationship? Or something else entirely? A recognition that with Antonio's death, all the barriers between her and Dominic had suddenly, irrevocably disappeared. Her phone buzzed with a message. "The funeral is tomorrow at St. Augustine's. I understand if you don't want to come, but I wanted you to know you're welcome if you choose to." The threat died with him, Lena. You're safe now. D. She stared at the message for a long time, her thumb hovering over the keyboard, trying to decide how to respond, or if she should respond at all. Finally, she typed, "I'm sorry for your loss. I know your relationship with him was complicated." The reply came immediately. "Thank you. Can I see you? After the funeral? I need to tell you something important." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. "What is it?" "Not over text. Face to face. Please, Lena, give me one more chance to explain everything." She should have refused, should have maintained the distance she needed to think clearly. But the plea in his message, the knowledge that his father's death had fundamentally changed their situation, made her type, "The Botanical Gardens, 7 p.m. tomorrow. I'll be there. Thank you." Maya found Lena standing by the window an hour later, staring out at the city lights without really seeing them. "You're going to meet him, aren't you?" Maya's voice held no judgment, only understanding. "I have to." Lena turned to face her friend. "His father is dead, which means everything he said about being able to make his own choices now is true. I need to hear what he has to say. And if he asks you to take him back? I don't know." Lena wrapped her arms around herself. "Part of me wants to. Part of me is still so angry at the choices he made, and part of me is just tired. Tired of hurting, tired of missing him, tired of trying to figure out if love is enough to overcome everything that's happened between us." Maya crossed to her, pulled her into a gentle hug. "Whatever you decide, I support you. Whether that's giving him another chance or walking away for good. Just make sure the choice is really yours, not something you're doing out of obligation or guilt or any emotion except what you truly want." "What if I don't know what I truly want?" "Then you tell him that. You tell him you need more time, and if he really loves you the way he claims, he'll give it to you without conditions." The next evening, Lena dressed carefully for the meeting. Not the black dress from their first dinner, which carried too many memories, but simple jeans and a soft sweater that made her feel like herself, instead of someone playing a part. She pulled her hair back in a loose ponytail, applied minimal makeup, and looked at her reflection with the kind of brutal honesty that only comes from heartbreak. She looked older than she had 3 months ago. The events with Dominic had left marks that went deeper than her appearance, had changed something fundamental in how she saw herself in the world. She wasn't the naive woman who had believed love could conquer darkness anymore. She was someone who understood that love was complicated, that good people made terrible choices, and that sometimes the right decision felt like dying. Maya drove her to the garden, squeezed her hand before Lena got out of the car. "Call me when you're ready to leave," Maya said. No matter what happens, I'll be here. Thank you. Lena's voice was thick with emotion. For everything. For being my friend even when I made terrible choices. For not judging me for falling in love with someone impossible. That's what best friends do. Maya smiled sadly. Now go. Get your answers. And Lena, remember that you deserve to be chosen. Not protected, not saved. Chosen. Make sure he understands the difference. Lena walked through the gardens as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. The paths were empty again, the gates unlocked, and she wondered if Dominic would always have this ability to bend the world around him to his will. The thought should have been unsettling, but instead it felt oddly comforting. At least she knew he would move heaven and earth for the things that mattered to him. The question was whether she still mattered enough. He was waiting in the rose garden, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him. Dark jeans, a simple black shirt, no jacket despite the cool evening air. He looked exhausted, like he'd spent the day after his father's funeral doing something that had drained him completely. But when he saw her approaching, his entire expression transformed. Lena. Relief and hope and a dozen other emotions crossed his face. You came. You said you had something important to tell me. She stopped a few feet away, maintaining the distance that felt necessary for clear thinking. I'm listening. Dominic pulled an envelope from his pocket, similar to the one Marcus had given her, but thicker, more official-looking. He held it out to her. I filed for divorce this morning, he said quietly. Before the funeral, before anything else. I went to my lawyer and started the process of ending my marriage to Victoria. Lena took the envelope with trembling hands, opened it to find legal documents that confirmed his words. Petition for dissolution of marriage, filed by Dominic Russo, citing irreconcilable differences. You can't, she heard herself say. The alliance, your empire, doesn't matter. His voice was firm, certain. None of it matters if I can't have you. I spent the last 4 days since my father died thinking about what you said at the reception. About courage. About how love without bravery is just a beautiful lie. And you were right, Lena. I wasn't brave enough then. But I'm brave enough now. Dominic, let me finish. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm just asking you to witness what I'm doing so you know that every choice I'm making from this moment forward is about choosing you, choosing us. Even if it's too late, even if you can never trust me again, I need you to see that I finally found the courage you deserved from the beginning. Lena stared at the divorce papers, at the proof that Dominic was willing to risk everything he'd built for a chance at being with her. What about Victoria? What about the Laurent alliance? Victoria understands. We had a conversation yesterday, after the funeral. She admitted that she never expected love from our marriage, only respect and mutual benefit. I told her I was in love with someone else, that I had been from before our wedding, and that I couldn't continue living a lie. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of nervousness she rarely saw from him. She's agreed to the divorce on the condition that we maintain certain business arrangements between our families. The territories will stay divided as agreed, but the personal union is over. But just like that? Lena couldn't quite believe it could be so simple. She's just letting you go? She was never holding me to begin with. Our marriage was a contract, Lena. A piece of paper that united two families but meant nothing emotionally. Victoria has her own life, her own interests. She doesn't need me for anything except the appearance of alliance, and that can be maintained through business agreements instead of marriage. Lena's mind was racing, trying to process this sudden shift in everything she thought she understood about Dominic's situation. And your family? They're okay with you divorcing the Laurent heir? They don't have a choice. For the first time, Lena heard real steel in his voice. With my father dead, I'm the undisputed head of the Russo family. What I say goes. And I'm saying that I won't live the rest of my life married to a woman I don't love, building an empire I don't want, sacrificing my happiness for a legacy that means nothing if I'm miserable. He took another step closer, close enough now that Lena could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the cool evening air. I'm choosing you, Lena. I'm choosing love over power, happiness over duty, us over everything my father spent his life building. I know I should have made this choice 3 months ago, before I hurt you, before I married Victoria, but I'm making it now, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I mean it. Tears blurred Lena's vision. What if I can't forgive you? What if the hurt is too deep? Then I'll accept that. His voice was steady despite the pain in his eyes. I'll sign the divorce papers, walk away from Victoria, and live with the knowledge that I found the love of my life and lost her because I was too afraid to fight for her when it mattered. But Lena, I needed you to know that your words at the reception changed me. You challenged me to be brave, and it took losing you to understand what that really meant. I don't know what to say. Lena's voice broke. I don't know if I'm ready to trust you again. Then don't. Dominic reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently took her hand. Don't trust me yet. Make me earn it back. Make me prove day after day that I'm the man you believed I could be. I'll wait as long as it takes, Lena, whether that's weeks or months or years. I'll be here, choosing you, until you decide whether you can choose me back. She looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers intertwined with hers like they belonged there. And she realized that somewhere in the last 4 days of thinking and grieving and trying to understand what she really wanted, she had made a decision. I'm still angry at you, she said quietly, for making choices without me, for deciding my safety was more important than my agency, for breaking my heart, even if you did it for what you thought were the right reasons. I know, and I'm terrified. Terrified of trusting you again, only to have you make another impossible choice that prioritizes protection over partnership. I understand. But Dominic, she looked up at him, let him see the tears streaming down her face and the hope warring with fear in her eyes. I'm also still in love with you, and I think maybe I always will be, which is the most frustrating thing I've ever experienced because it would be so much easier if I could just hate you and move on. Something that looked like desperate hope flickered across his face. So what does that mean? It means I'm not ready to dive back into a relationship with you, but I'm willing to try something slower, carefully, with boundaries and honest communication and the understanding that if you ever make a major decision about us without consulting me again, I will walk away and never come back. I can do that. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I can do slow. I can do careful. I can do whatever you need, Lena. And I need you to understand something. She squeezed his hand, making sure he was really listening. If we do this, if we try again, I need you to be honest with me about your world, about the violence, about the danger, about the complicated morality of what you do. No more protecting me from the truth. No more making decisions for me because you think I can't handle reality. You want the truth? Dominic's expression grew serious. The truth is that my world is still dangerous. My father is dead, but there are other families, other threats, other people who might see you as a weakness to exploit. Dating me means accepting a level of risk that most people wouldn't tolerate. It means security guards and careful planning and the constant awareness that violence exists just outside our bubble of happiness. I know. And the truth is that I'm not sure I can ever completely leave this life. The family depends on me. The territories require management. The empire my father built needs someone to run it, or it will collapse into chaos that will get people killed. He paused, then added, but I can promise you that I'll never choose the empire over you again. That if I'm faced with an impossible choice, I'll talk to you first instead of making decisions alone. And that I'll work every day to build a life where you feel safe and loved and valued as an equal partner instead of someone who needs protection. Lena studied his face, looking for any hint of doubt or deception, and found only raw honesty and the kind of vulnerability she'd rarely seen from him. Okay, she finally said. Okay, let's try, slowly, carefully. And if either of us realizes this isn't working, we promise to be honest about it, instead of dragging out something that's only causing pain. The relief that flooded Dominic's expression was almost painful to witness. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly enough that she could feel his heart hammering against his chest. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. Thank you for giving me another chance. I swear I won't waste it. Lena let herself melt into his embrace, let herself feel the warmth and safety and rightness of being in his arms again. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other as the last light faded from the sky and the garden settled into peaceful darkness around them. When they finally pulled apart, Lena was surprised to find herself smiling, a real smile, the first genuine one she'd felt in months. So what happens now? She asked. Now I take you to dinner. Dominic smiled back, the kind of devastating smile that had made her fall for him in the first place. Somewhere normal, somewhere without armed guards and secret passwords. I want to date you properly, Lena, the way I should have from the beginning, before everything got so complicated. There's a little Italian place near my apartment, Lena offered. Mama Rosa's. Nothing fancy, but the food is incredible. Perfect. He took her hand, laced their fingers together. Lead the way. So they left the botanical gardens together, walked through the city streets like a normal couple on a normal date, and discovered that without the weight of impossible choices hanging over them, they could simply enjoy each other's company. They talked about everything and nothing, her work at the hospital, his plans for transitioning some of the family's operations toward legitimate businesses, their shared love of old movies and terrible puns. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Lena felt like she could breathe again. The next 3 months unfolded with a gentleness Lena hadn't expected. Dominic kept his promise about taking things slowly, about rebuilding trust through consistent action rather than grand gestures. He showed up when he said he would. He called every night, even when meetings ran late. He introduced her to the legitimate side of his business empire, the real estate holdings, the restaurants and nightclubs, the charity foundation his mother had started before her death. And he was honest, almost brutally so, about the darker aspects of his world. When there were territorial disputes, he told her about them. When violence erupted between rival families, he didn't hide it from her. He gave her the information she needed to make informed choices about their relationship, trusting her to decide what she could handle instead of deciding for her. The divorce from Victoria was finalized 6 weeks after Dominic filed the papers. It was handled quietly, without media attention, and structured in a way that maintained the business alliance between the Russo and Laurent families while dissolving the personal union. Victoria sent Lena a note afterward, just a simple card that read, "Take care of him. Underneath the armor, he's more fragile than he looks." Lena had been surprised by the kindness in that gesture, by the recognition from Victoria that Dominic had never really belonged to her, had always been waiting for someone else. Maya, true to her word, supported Lena's decision to give Dominic another chance while also maintaining healthy skepticism. She became friends with Marcus, oddly enough, bonding over their shared roles as the people who loved and worried about Lena and Dominic respectively. The four of them had dinner together once a month, and Lena cherished those evenings where their complicated lives felt almost normal. But it was the small moments that really healed Lena's heart, the way Dominic learned to ask for her opinion instead of making decisions for her. The morning he showed up at her apartment with coffee and pastries, just because he wanted to see her before her shift. The night he admitted that running the family empire made him feel trapped, and she held him while he processed years of resentment toward a legacy he'd never chosen. And slowly, carefully, Lena began to forgive him. Not all at once, but in increments. Each honest conversation, each moment of vulnerability, each choice he made to prioritize their partnership over his instinct to protect her from everything difficult. 4 months after their reconciliation in the botanical gardens, Dominic took Lena back to Salvatore's for dinner. The restaurant looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed. They weren't hiding anymore. Their relationship wasn't a secret that had to be protected from dangerous fathers and impossible alliances. They were just two people who had fought their way back to each other and were building something real. "I have something to tell you," Dominic said over dessert, his expression serious enough to make Lena's heart skip. "What is it?" "I'm stepping back from running the day-to-day operations of the family business. Marcus is taking over most of the territory management. I'm keeping control of the legitimate enterprises, the real estate, the restaurants, the investments. But I'm done with the violence, done with the territorial disputes and the constant threat of war." Lena set down her fork, stunned. "Dominic, that's huge. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He reached across the table, took her hand. "You challenged me to be brave enough to choose the life I want instead of the one I inherited. This is me doing that. I can't walk away completely. The family would fall apart, and the resulting chaos would get people killed. But I can transition towards something better. Something that doesn't require me to be the kind of man my father was." "What changed your mind?" "You did." His thumb traced the familiar pattern on her hand. "Being with you makes me want to be better, not just for you, but for myself. I spent my whole life believing I was trapped in this role, that I had no choice but to follow the path my father set. But watching you walk away from me at that reception, seeing the disappointment in your eyes when I proved I wasn't brave enough, that broke something open inside me, made me realize I'd rather risk everything building something new than spend another day living a life that makes me miserable." Tears pricked at Lena's eyes. I'm proud of you for making this choice, for being brave enough to change. I couldn't have done it without you. He paused, then added quietly, Actually, that's not true. I could have done it without you, but I wouldn't have wanted to. You make me want to be the man you believed I could be, even when I didn't believe it myself. That night, after dinner, Dominic drove Lena to a building she didn't recognize, a converted warehouse in an industrial district that was slowly being revitalized. He led her inside, up 3 flights of stairs, and unlocked a door to reveal a spacious loft apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. What is this? Lena asked, taking in the open floor plan, the modern kitchen, the comfortable furniture arranged to take advantage of the spectacular view. It's mine, or it will be, once the paperwork clears. Dominic moved to stand beside her at the windows. I'm selling the house I shared with Victoria. Too many memories of a life I didn't want. This place is a fresh start. Somewhere that's just mine, not inherited or connected to family legacy. A place where I can figure out who Dominic Russo is when he's not trying to live up to his father's expectations. Lena turned to look at him, saw the nervousness in his expression. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that I'm building a life I can be proud of. A life that has room in it for love and happiness and all the things I sacrificed for too long. He took her hand, and I'm hoping that eventually, when you're ready, you might want to be part of that life. Not just as someone I date, but as a real partner. As someone who helps me decide what our future looks like instead of following a path someone else chose. Dominic, I'm not asking you to move in, he said quickly. Not yet. I know we're still rebuilding trust, still figuring out how this works between us. But I wanted you to see that I'm serious about change, that I'm creating space in my life for the future we both deserve. Lena looked around the loft at the blank canvas of possibility it represented. She thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The betrayal and heartbreak, the anger and forgiveness, the slow, painful process of learning to trust again. And she realized that somewhere along the way, she had stopped being afraid. Ask me again in 6 months, she said, squeezing his hand. Ask me to move in with you once we've proven that we can really do this, that we can be partners who communicate and compromise and choose each other every day, not just in the dramatic moments, but in all the small, ordinary ones too. Dominic's smile was worth every moment of pain they'd endured to get here. 6 months, I can do that. 6 months later, almost exactly a year after the night Dominic had first walked into her emergency room bleeding and changing her life forever, Lena stood in that same loft apartment surrounded by moving boxes. Maya was there helping her unpack kitchen supplies and offering running commentary about Dominic's minimalist taste in decor. Marcus showed up with lunch and spent an hour installing security features that made Lena feel safe without feeling imprisoned. And Dominic moved through the chaos with a peaceful expression, clearly happy just to have her there. They had proven, over those 6 months, that they could build something real. They'd navigated arguments about boundaries and differences in communication styles. They'd celebrated victories at the hospital and successful business transitions. They'd spent quiet nights watching old movies and intense evenings discussing the future of the family empire and how to transition it toward legitimacy. And through it all, they had chosen each other, not out of desperation or fear or the intoxicating rush of forbidden love, but out of genuine partnership and the recognition that they were better together than apart. That night, after everyone had left and the loft was finally quiet, Lena and Dominic sat on the couch watching the city lights sparkle below them. Thank you, Dominic said quietly, his arm around her shoulders. For giving me another chance. For teaching me what real courage looks like. For choosing me even after I proved I didn't deserve you. You earned it, Lena replied, leaning into his warmth. Every day. With every choice you made to be better. To be brave. To build a life worth living instead of just surviving. I have something for you. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Lena's breath caught. But when he opened it, instead of a ring, she found a key. It's the key to this loft, he explained, but it's also symbolic. A reminder that you hold the key to my life, my future, everything I'm building. I'm not asking you to marry me, not yet. We've rushed too many things in our relationship. But I'm promising you that when I do ask, and I will ask, Lena, because I want to spend the rest of my life with you, it will be because we've built something strong enough to last. Something based on trust and honesty, and the courage to keep choosing each other, no matter what challenges we face. Helena took the key, felt its weight in her palm. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier now than they had in the early days. "I love the man you've become, the man who's brave enough to change, to admit mistakes, to build something better than what he inherited. I love you too." He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. "And I promise you, every day for the rest of my life, I will choose you. Not over you, not for you, but with you. As partners, as equals. As two people who fought their way back to each other and decided love was worth the risk." And in that moment, surrounded by boxes and city lights, and the promise of a future they would build together, Lena finally understood what Maya had meant all those months ago. She hadn't needed saving. She had always been strong enough to save herself. But she had chosen to build a life with someone who recognized that strength, who honored it, who stood beside her as an equal rather than a protector. And that made all the difference. 3 years later, Lena stood in the community clinic she'd opened in the neighborhood where she'd grown up. The clinic offered free medical care to people who had nowhere else to go, funded by a combination of Dominic's legitimate business profits and donations from families who remembered what it was like to need help and have nowhere to turn. Maya's bakery occupied the storefront next door, providing fresh bread and pastries at prices anyone could afford. The two businesses had become anchors for the revitalization of the neighborhood, proof that success didn't require exploitation, that power could be used to build up instead of tear down. Dominic appeared in the doorway of her office, looking relaxed in jeans and a simple shirt, his tie abandoned sometime around noon. He'd fully transitioned out of the violent side of the family business, focusing instead on legitimate enterprises that created jobs and opportunities rather than perpetuating cycles of crime. "Ready to go?" he asked, and Lena saw the ring on his left hand catch the light. The simple band they'd exchanged 6 months ago in a small ceremony attended only by their closest friends and family. "Ready?" she confirmed, shutting down her computer and grabbing her bag. They walked through the clinic together, Dominic greeting the staff by name, stopping to talk to a few patients who recognized him from his work with the community foundation. This was who he'd become. Not the feared Mafia boss, but a man dedicated to using his resources to help others, to making up for the harm his family's empire had caused over the years. Outside, the neighborhood bustled with evening activity. Children played in the park that Dominic's foundation had renovated. Small businesses thrived in storefronts that had once been abandoned. And everywhere Lena looked, she saw evidence of what was possible when power chose service over domination. "I've been thinking," Dominic said as they walked toward their car, "about starting a mentorship program. Something that gives kids in this neighborhood alternatives to the kind of life I lived. Education funding, job training, support systems that show them there are paths forward that don't involve violence or crime." Lena smiled, squeezed his hand. "I think that's a beautiful idea. Will you help me plan it? I want to make sure we're addressing the real needs, not just throwing money at problems I don't fully understand." "Of course." She stopped walking, turned to face him. "That's what partners do, right? Build things together, make decisions together, choose the future together." Dominic pulled her close, kissed her in the middle of the sidewalk while the neighborhood moved around them. "Together," he agreed. "Always together." And as they drove home through the city, where their love story had begun with gunshot wounds and impossible choices, Lena reflected on how far they'd both come. She had learned that love didn't mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's protection. Dominic had learned that courage meant choosing vulnerability over control, partnership over power. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone, a life defined not by the darkness of Dominic's past or the pain of their separation, but by their shared commitment to being better, doing better, choosing better every single day. She had walked into his world expecting to save a life. Instead, she had found something far more valuable, a partnership that had saved them both. And that, Lena thought as they pulled up to the loft that had become their home, was the greatest truth she had ever learned. She had never needed saving, but she had chosen to build a life with someone who understood that loving her meant empowering her, not protecting her from the world. And in the end, that choice, that brave, difficult, rewarding choice, had made all the difference.